Hi, I'm Nick Roulette from Performance Designs, and today I'm going to show you how to pro-pack a large canopy using a Sabre 2 260. Alright, we start our pack job by setting the brakes. Very important that our brakes are set before we start packing. I would not want to see what the opening would look like without it. It would probably be very fast. A lot like starting a car in drive as opposed to in park. So this is where we start everything, making sure that we pull that brake setting down through the metal guide ring on the riser. It's also very important to stow all the excess on the keeper in the back of the riser. We don't want that floating around to get half hitched around anything. Once we do that, we can go ahead and grab the lines and walk up to the parachute. I put the steering lines on top of my index finger. I then put the rear risers in between my index finger and my middle finger. And then the front risers between my middle finger and my ring finger. And I do that both on the left hand and the right hand and walk up to the canopy. After our skydive, the canopy may be inflated with air. It may be inverted a little bit. So I'm going to do something to kind of keep the canopy lying flat and to get some of the air out of the canopy, which will make flaking our pack job a bit easier. Weight the rig or secure it with, if you're packing on the grass, secure it with a packing stake or something like that so that we can keep some good line tension on our pack job. So now what I'm going to do is grab the C's and D's, which is basically the two grommets that are right here, encompass the C's and D's, and the A's and B's go through the grommets on the other side of the slider. I'm going to rotate the pack job or the canopy 90 degrees to my body, and this is where I'm going to shake it out a bit. I'm even going to kind of lift up on these grommets here and grab these A lines and give it a shake. Now all of our line attachment points are pretty much matched up and all the materials laying nice and flat so that it'll make my job a little bit easier. This is a Sabre 2 260, so it's a 9-cell canopy. If you were taught to count the cells, go ahead and do that, but the next step is flaking out the nose and getting it ready for the pack job. So there should be 9 of those. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Making sure these line attachment points line up nice and neat, get a little bit of the air out of it, and I'm just going to stick it right between my legs. Since I already flaked the canopy and got some of the air out of it, I don't need to shake the canopy with the nose in my hand. So I think everyone's pretty much been taught that we keep the lines to the center of the pack job and the fabric to the outside. So that's what I'm going to do here, nothing different. I can see right now the pocket that I want to put my arm down in between the A and B lines, and there's a line attachment point right here on the canopy. That's going to be kind of my reference line where I'm going to bring my arm out and just make a little crease as best I can between the B and C lines. I can see in there. If the slider gets in the way, just go ahead and push it out, but I don't like to bring the slider up because it oftentimes makes a mess of lines and it's very hard to see where the right side of the canopy is and where the left side of the canopy is. So I leave that slider down there to help keep it easy for me to see. These are the steering lines, which is on the tail of the canopy, and I'm just going to lay them on my forearm here while I look down into my pack job. These 4 lines are almost always the easiest one. On a 9-cell canopy, they're almost always the easiest one to find, but there is a 5th line right here that we don't want to forget about. While I'm kind of pulling these off to the side, I'm also keeping the C lines in place, and then I'm just going to, about halfway through these 2 line attachment points, kind of fold, make a crease in the material there, and clean these up. Because this canopy is so large, I got to make sure that the lines are in place and that we're not letting any material get in between those lines, which can cause damage and friction and things over the course of many jumps. Now that I'm done with that, you can see that these steering lines are all lying nice and flat here. And this is the stabilizer. I'm just going to kind of put the stabilizer right here. It's not because I'm trying to hide a line over or anything like that. I'm just trying to make my pack job look a little cleaner. So now that that side is done, I'm going to move over to the other side. Again, in between the A and B lines, I'm going to make a little pocket. Bring my arm out. You can see that line attachment point right here. As I look into this side, in between the B and the C lines, that slider's in the way. I'm just going to kind of move it off to the side, get my arm down in there, push that material to the outside. Again, there's that line attachment point. Kind of do what I need to do to get this nice and clean. Just a small little stabilizer. These are the steering lines on the tail of the canopy, laying them on my forearm. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 lines. There we go. Make a nice little pocket. These steering lines just going to lay nice and flat. Make sure there's no lines in between them. Again, the stabilizer just going to lay right on top of that. Not to hide anything, just to make it look a little cleaner. The drawstrings on our slider should be pushed in just a little bit to our pack job. You can see that there's a bar tack on there, and on this one here it's a blue bar tack. I want to push that blue bar tack in just a bit. I don't want the excess drawstring to be hanging out of my slider a lot. Now, if we did one thing and one thing only, it would be putting a hand down in there and with my pointer finger pushing down on that slider. That basically will put the slider in the position that it needs to be. Equal parts on both the front and the back part of the canopy and the right and the left side of the pack job, as well as putting the grommets all the way down on the stops. That's very important. We don't want them to sneak up here. It can cause hard openings. So now that I've done that, I'm just going to clean it up a little bit and make sure that it looks nice. And the pack job looks pretty good right now. I know that the rises are straight back down there on the rig, or in this case just the board, because the grommets right here on my slider are equal height. If they were offset, one was higher or lower, I'd know that I'd have a riser from down back on the rig that is too far forward, which can cause off-heading openings or turning. If you're jumping something smaller and faster, maybe heavily loaded, could also cause line twist, which we are trying to avoid. So now that that all looks good, I'm going to come down, tail up. On all Performance Designs canopies, there's a warning label right there on the center with a couple of seams. You can see the threads. That is the center of that tail, which is what we want to use. I'm just going to use my knee and keep that material that I just pushed to the outside of the pack job in its place. And I'm going to line up these two seams here. Right here, it's a folded over seam. You can't see any threads, but if you go to the actual tail of the canopy, you can see that there's two threads where that tail has been folded over. That's what I'm going to match up right here. While I do that, I'm going to take the tail of the canopy here and allow it to kind of meet up onto the grommets on the slider. While I pinch the tail of the canopy here, I'm going to go down and away with some pressure while I make my fold. And I'm going to kind of let my hand slide down to this side. Now, depending upon how big the canopy is, kind of depends on how many times I roll the tail. In this case, I'm not really rolling it like you would a really tight roll or a cigarette roll or something like that. I'm more folding it in 1.5 to 2 inch sections. So I fold it once, twice, 3 times, and that's pretty good on this one. The warning label looks pretty good up here. There's not a bunch of material that's bunched up around these lines, which is over time going to cause damage to the tail of the canopy. And before I lay it down on the ground, I'm going to walk myself up so that the canopy is all the way up here on my shoulder. And I'm going to use both my hands to get as much air out of the canopy as I can before I lay it on the ground. Just makes it easier for me to lay it down as well as less time that I need to spend on the ground. So now that I got a little bit of the air out of it, I'm going to clean up that tail a little bit, make sure the roll that I just did didn't come undone too much. And I'm going to lay this canopy on the ground. While I do it, it's going to be one smooth motion. I'm going to make sure my bag is out of the way. It's going to be one smooth motion, and the canopy is going to lay pretty much on this forearm right here as I keep good line tension on those lines. Now I'm ready to straighten the bag and cock the pilot chute. Now that we've got this all ready to go, I'm going to start getting the air out of the canopy. Put my knees basically right on the warning label, just a little bit further up from the grommets, pushing the knees together a little bit to help keep everything in place, as well as making sure that it's pushing down. Everything goes away from my body or away from the rig. It helps keep good line tension on the lines and allows me to shape the canopy the way I need to. I kind of take the mindset of getting the canopy to a shape of approximately the same size as the bag, and then I just pull the bag around the canopy while I do that. So what I'm doing here is working with one side of the canopy at a time, getting the air out of it. It's a new canopy, so I need to make sure all the air is out of it. And basically, halfway between this side and this center stitch line, I'm grabbing the canopy and making it fold. Now that I have this, I'm going to take my knees off the canopy, but before I do so, I'm going to put my hand in its place so that I can keep a nice tension on the canopy. I'm going to throw my leg across about halfway from the canopy, and I'm going to grab the canopy with my hand and make my first fold. And then I'm going to come right back and put my knee on the canopy again. Right now I'm not wrestling the canopy, but I am controlling it and keeping it where I want it to be. I'm going to grab the canopy with one hand, both my folds, and rest it up here on my thigh, where I make the rest of the fold for my S-fold. Kind of using my knee in different places to help keep that canopy under control, and I start sliding the bag and the flap underneath. Once I get one side of the canopy in the bag, it's pretty easy for me to get the rest of the bag pulled around the canopy. At this point, I'm going to set the bag up on its end and get ready to make my line stows. Now that I have the canopy in the bag, I can start securing this flap and getting the canopy all the way in it. I do it by splitting the lines in between my middle finger and my index finger to keep them from sliding off from either side of the bag, and I get a good grip on that flap and pull the grommet all the way to that rubber band to make my first stow. I want those stows to be nice and equal, and I want them all to be about the same size. And the first one, I get as much slack out of the lines as I can, and that really helps keep the rest of the line stows nice and neat. So as I get this rubber band through here, I am going to make these nice and symmetrical. The important thing is to make sure that you being doing the same thing all the way through the pack job, which is using rubber bands, large rubber bands, and double stowing. This prevents an out-of-sequence deployment as we walk our way through the stowing of the lines. This canopy has fairly long lines because it's so large. You want to make sure you have enough rubber bands on there. Sometimes throwing a couple extra on there makes it a little bit easier in case you break one in the middle and you're in a rush. So, now that we're done stowing our lines, we would be able to make sure, double check that that pilot chute is cocked, which it is, and we can go ahead and put the bag into the container and close it up. Thanks for tuning in. Hopefully you learned some new tips for your next pack job. Let's keep nice tight lines during our flaking, proper slider positioning, and nice tight even line stows. Let us know how it goes, and remember, there's more to a good pack job than a finished one.